Hey everyone, it's Adrienne Lopez here, the Integrative Healing Coach. And it has been a minute since I have produced a episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast. I have been, I've had my attention in other places in regards to some travel, some training, some projects that I've been working on, most recently the in-person workshop that I'll be offering this Saturday, September the 20th, called Permission to Flourish, where participants will be invited to look at what are the optimal conditions for flourishing, for accessing our creativity and our potential. So if you haven't yet, check it out. I will put the link to the event in the description of this podcast so you can check it out. And I've been holding a monthly live somatic sensing circle in my home on the third Monday of each month. And I've also been holding an online version. If you're not in Portland local, you can join us online the third Thursday of each month. I'll also put the links to both of those circles in the description of this week's, or I should say this month's podcast, because to be honest, instead of a weekly podcast right now, it looks like it will be a push to monthly endeavor at this moment. And perhaps there'll be a time when I'll go back to weekly production schedule. But for now, this week's episode is called Bedtime Stories for Lightworkers. So this is a special invitation as stemming out of all of the work that I've been doing in different venues and different modes that I wanted to share with you. And so this is an invitation to healers, to vision holders, to alchemic transformers, to star seeds, to new earth creators, to magicians, to magical creators of all kinds. So I want to start off with making a statement that you are a quantum being. But you don't have to take my word for it. I invite you to close your eyes for a moment, to turn your attention within and take a deep grounding breath, to feel your body. Tune into the life force field that's all around you. There is an infinite sea of possibilities all around us, yet we have been conditioned to have a really narrow focus, all of our attention on the outside world. But how can we access a more expansive relationship to creation? We are creation itself as creators. So what makes this world of creation more accessible to us? Some more readily available than others. Some different aspects of reality become more available depending on how we run our energy. And specifically for me, it all comes down to one central quality if I had to create a bottom line, and that is something called momentum. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. The momentum we've created, both you and I, that has been directed by the guardrails of our belief system, our thought patterns, and the physical embodiment of these thought patterns, and our attention on certain aspects of reality and totally ignoring or not even able to see other aspects of reality. So, for instance, for those of you that are familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza in his book called Breaking the Habit of Being You, our body has downloaded certain patterns of behaving on autopilot, so we don't have to think about them. They're just running behind, like those tabs open on our screen on our computer that we've forgotten about. And they're continuing to run through the people around us, the circumstances and the situations that we were planted in as a young child. But now, as we've gotten older and hopefully put some roots down, grown a little, sprouted, even created some amazing things in our life so far, What would happen if we could text that, let's say? What if we had to stop functioning, as one of my mentors says, with one arm tied behind our... And this is in regard to that we've all faced challenges and obstacles. We've all had to constrict ourselves and prune ourselves in different ways, whether we were conscious of it or not. And this momentum is related to the parts of our experience that we focused on most. And fortunately, depending on how you see it, our mind has been evolutionarily designed to focus on the negative because that's what keeps us safe. It was those creatures who were able to suss out their environment and see any clues of danger so they could preempt any catastrophe and stay alive to live another day. But there's something new coming online. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you already know that there's a huge death spiral happening, a sloughing off of old ways of being that are no longer serving us or the common good. And in this way, we're being asked to embrace our quantum nature. And this is really a savage act of devotion, let's say. And when I use this word savage, I use it in the most loving sense of literally being wild, being undomesticated, being willing to step outside of the boundaries of what we've been conditioned to focus our attention on, because it is this act itself which will allow us the pathway into the future, into a viable future for ourselves and our others, and all those that are yet to come. So, accepting our quantum nature is a savage act. It is a willingness to take no prisoners, make no accommodation for conditions that are almost quantum. Because once we see what's possible, once you feel in your body what's possible, there is no compromise. It's a dropping into being fully in devotion to the service of the light. And light is simply a quality, a dynamic of information, something that operates in consciousness wanting to land in every human being embodied in the vessel, the physical body. And part of this devotion is holding the vision of the knowing. That even though I might not be able to see it with my physical eyes, that when I hold the vision, it becomes possible. It is the holding of the vision that actually pulls it into density. And so it happens, just like a field of flowers, of blooming violets popping open one by one in the light of day, in the light of awareness of our true nature. As many of us are still holding on, still caught up in the momentum of what was, arguing for our limitations and of the circumstances of our own suffering. And because life is so loving and so giving, it will continually give us what we demand until we begin to ask for something else and realize that we are not alone. You are not alone. I am not alone. Under the surface of this earth, we are connected through the mycelium root system of consciousness, all the way down to the crystal core of Mother Gaia, and all the way up to Father Sky. It is an energetic network that connects us to source intelligence. It is not the internet. The internet is simply a model of who we already are, tapping into infinite source knowledge at any moment. And when we do this intentionally on purpose, allowing more and more space for our soul to arrive on this planet, in this vessel of this body, we're able to detach and let go the timelines of suffering. And we began to see the lifelines of light in front of us, to the sides of us, all around us, calling our name, calling us home. And we began to have the energetic vision, as I mentioned, not based on our physical eyes and what's out in the world, but in our heart and our embodied knowing of what truly is us. And we rest in it and we trust in it, because we know that when we begin to tune in to our own GPS system, our own internal instructional booklet, dialed in through our nervous system, and begin to really attune to our own experience, that this sensory perception is instantaneous. It doesn't even take thought. It takes a resting in and a learning in and an allowing to simply know. So when I say that we are quantum beings, you don't have to take my word for it. You can feel into your own knowing, and the answer will be there for you. And this is where the storytelling comes into play as a sort of testimonial of what's possible in case you need reminding today. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we get caught into this cultural field of limitation and storytelling. So I've been doing a lot of traveling this year. And one thing I really love about traveling is that I get to leave the field of my everyday life with all of the mental constructs and limitations and storytelling. And I get to rise or transcend them and go into another cultural field that is not alive in me yet because I haven't been there long enough to plug in, let's say. And so there is this time of being unrestricted through cultural energetic fields. And of course, if you stay in any location long enough, you begin to plug into that cultural field of information, you begin to download it, and then you begin to operate inside of it. But travel is probably the most impactful reminder that we're often living in invisible constructs called belief systems that determine the breadth and width and spectrum of how many of us live if we're not conscious of these systems. And so I wanted to share a story with you this week about an impactful experience of this opportunity to transcend the personal into the bigger lens of the interpersonal and intergenerational and archetypal realm that we're all living in. So this last week or so, I was in Florida assisting the field facilitator training. And really, the field is just a amplification of a shared reality when tapped into on purpose, full-bodied somatically, tuning into all the layers of our being in present time reality and the power of the field that creates and has an intelligence of its own that is more informed, wise, and knowing than any single one person. When we approach it, knowing, even often unaware of its power, but coming into it as a ritual or ceremonial act, knowing that whatever is most nourishing to your spirit, most healing to your soul, it's going to emerge, let's say. And it looks like magic just because the mind has been so conditioned, let's say, in contrary to just what's that called when morphogenic fields that many animals you can see, flocks of birds and schools of fish swim in, that intelligence that they just rest in that guides them without having to think or pre-plan. So I attended this container of people that are interested in holding the field for their own health and well-being, as well as the people around them, their communities, their families. And there was an exercise that we were doing, and in this exercise I had a body memory, like my body remembered something that my mind had forgotten. And most often our mind forgets things that are too painful, too overwhelming, disorientating, unexplainable. We don't have the tools or the capacity to navigate them. So they get pushed down out of consciousness. And so I had this instantaneous body memory that I didn't even know was there until I did. It rose up in me like a wave of the ocean through me. And in this rising up, there was an opportunity for me to receive a new imprint in my body and my nervous system of one of love. And after this experience, which I didn't even see coming because how could I? I was wide open. And I was walking out of our practice room, out into the grounds, into nature. And I met a participant that was having an incredibly difficult time. And he was a large person. He's like 6'2", and he was in deep grief and suffering. He was physically shouting and crying, weeping. And because I was in this wide open state, I didn't realize that I wasn't able to meet him in his uncontained nature. I just didn't have the ability to meet him as a facilitator because I was in this altered state at the moment after having this incredible body memory. It almost took my mind offline for a little bit till I could integrate it back in. So I left him knowing that he would be taken care of by somebody that was able to meet his needs and address how to best serve him. And I went to bed because I was exhausted. And I was kind of reenacting this state in my nervous system that was akin to shock. Because that night in my bed, as I was sleeping, and slowly in the morning as I awoke, I realized that those two moments in this event were like little nightmare vignettes of my childhood that I could never actually integrate or digest in a way that was healthy for me. And so I realized that man that showed up on my path was a reenactment of my sister's uncontainment. As a child, I grew up with her suffering from a bipolar, where she would often have these uncontrolled outbursts. And I was a child. I was probably about 8 or 9 the first time she began to have these episodes. And they never, like that part of me never got attended to by the adults around me. And so there was this reservoir, freeze state of related to that scene that got to be moved through my organism through that event. And I would have never chose those experiences because they are rooted in a deeply painful experience. But it was the resistance to those very experiences that has limited me and stopped me in my life in certain areas. Because when we are trying to avoid painful memories, often unconsciously, it affects the trajectory or momentum of our lives. And so the field is a place that delivers the medicine, almost like a medicine journey, except it's transpersonal medicine. It's collective medicine that's called into a space. And it is the perfect journey for each participant because infinite intelligence knows exactly what medicine you can both receive, how much, the dose to give you, and what is key for you in your developmental growth at this time as a soul and a spirit on this journey. So in one way, it's like choose your own adventure, but often it's unconscious that we're choosing what we're choosing. And this, for lack of a better phrase, this mothering intelligence will hold us exactly where we need to be held and exactly in the manner in which we require to be held for healing, for the rewiring of our nervous system to the cellular level. And in the morning when I awoke, I felt my breath landing in my body, like I could breathe more fully in my body than I ever remember being able to breathe before. And it was this next day, the day after, soon after, we were having our closing circle. And before the closing circle, I had gone to wash my hands in the bathroom. And I was looking in the mirror, and when I looked at the mirror, I saw my grandmother looking back at me. And I was taken aback because I didn't expect to see her there. And I thought, oh my goodness, either my grandmother's spirit is here with me now, but I look exactly like my grandmother in that moment. And I had to look again. And after that, I went to the closing circle and sat down and listening to all the profound shares of the people who had stood up to share different things that they were taking away with them from this journey that we were on together for those 7 days. And as I was sitting there, I had a transmission from my grandmother, of course, who's in spirit. And it was not in words, but it was like, you're in the fields. And that had resonance with me because my grandmother had a 6th grade education and she worked in the fields. She would, and her family, it was a communal work to go to the fields and pick the crops. They would first go and pick all the walnuts, and then after that crop was picked, they would go to the next field and pick all the peaches, and so on. And so literally I am in the field, except this time it's a different type of field. It's the field of the soil of human consciousness. And so the irony was impactful to me at that moment. I almost wanted to scream out or laugh because spirit is so infinitely imaginative, funny, right on time. And it was this experience that I could not have foreseen or orchestrated through my own individual consciousness. But I realized that these personal experiences I'd had, both through the reenactments of the physical touch and then the vignette of the man who was suffering, that these were intergenerational archetypes that had been running through my family. And seeing my grandmother was just a acknowledgement that these patterns are larger than her, they're larger than I, and they've become personalized. And that at this time, we're being given, all of us, the incredible opportunity to uproot patterns of suffering, patterns of intergenerational, unconscious, confining ways of being. And that we're being invited to bring all of our resource, our internal resource, online, because that's where our potential and our magic and all that we need to know for the next step on this evolutionary human journey. And so sharing the story as a testimonial, I guess, and a witnessing of this shift that I'm experiencing on a personal level and also on a collective level. And as a message to you and the good work that you're doing, even though there might not seem to be a place for it yet, because the cultural field that we're inhabiting right now can't even imagine what's going to be called forth for this next step in our growth and our development. And so we are calling from the future and from the past new ways of being through the alchemic transmutation of these programs that we've been running in our life energy, largely unconscious, to bring our attention to being a co-creator, consciousness itself, to open up that space where creator wisdom moves through us, as us, and our own unique lens or window into this world will be our unique personal, interpersonal medicine that could never be created by anybody else but us. Our unique soul signature is weaving into this matrix a different quality of being than ever existed before, on purpose. At this time, shift the entire field into a level that is being required for us to make the shift and the changes in consciousness, in the ways of being, in the systems and structures, at all levels. And whatever we place our attention on grows. And I'll leave you with this last piece before I go, as a way of putting a beautiful bow around this week's episode of the power of perception. And many empaths and light workers have been given a beautiful gift to tune into the environment, to tune into other people's energy systems as a way of survival, right? It kept us safe as children. We could guess before things ever happened. That way we could control our environment and keep ourselves and others safe, which is an incredible gift. And it's also an incredible way of creating the thing that we don't want. And to help clarify this even more, that if I see a person in suffering as an empath, I intuitively want to bring my attention to their suffering and hold their suffering with them, not realizing that when I bring my attention to their suffering, it amplifies their suffering because my attention and perception is that powerful. And so now that I know this, I get to choose a more empowering way to use my perception to shift into timelines that are more enlivening and life-serving. Not to say that I'm not paying attention to someone in suffering. I'm just holding a different view of them. Instead of joining into their suffering, which amplifies it, I get to hold what I know is possible for that person as whole, as complete, as grounded, someone who is remembering the fullness of who they are. And then that way, grounded in my own power and boundaries, automatically, if people are open, because it's all individual will, they can actually morph into that reality as well. And that is the strongest and most powerful thing that as a space holder, I can do. Holding the space of my own knowing for myself without focusing my attention on the reality of their suffering, knowing that these personal and intergenerational patterns are being cleaned out of human timelines. And then I get to do my part by placing my attention on the most viable timeline. And the energetic quality of that timeline is what allows it to actually expand and land on this planet. And that, my friend, is why empaths are here, is to land those higher timelines into this reality. And we do it through the superpower of our perception. And as I would end this story, is that this is just the beginning. And so once upon a time is happening every moment of the day when we say so. And the end, that'll be up to you. But I invite you to step into your place as an embodied space holder, because that is what will transform this planet. And with that, my friend, I will end this week's episode, or this month's episode, of the Lifting the Veil podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you heard something here today that lit you up or inspired you, I'd love to hear about that as well. Please don't forget to follow, subscribe, leave a comment. It helps improve the distribution of this podcast, which continues to allow me to produce this podcast on a regular basis. So until next time, please remember what a valuable treasure you are, and I will see you in October. Until then, please remember what a valuable treasure you are, and bye for now.